Valric didn't know the woman kneeling in his courtyard was the wolf who had saved his life. He didn't know she had tracked him across 3 territories, slipping through shadows and sleeping in frozen hollows, just to find him again. He didn't know that beneath her ragged cloak and dirt-streaked face lived a power so ancient that even the elders spoke of it in whispers. And he certainly didn't know that the scar on his chest, the one he touched every night before sleep, the one left by the beast that should have killed him, had been sealed shut by her teeth. Her saliva, her desperate magic poured into his dying body on a blood-soaked forest floor 5 years ago. All Valric knew was that winter was coming. The keep was short-staffed, and the mute woman at his gates looked like she hadn't eaten in weeks. He should have sent her away. Thornwood Keep didn't take in strays. Not anymore. Not after what happened with the last refugees who'd turned out to be assassins wearing desperate faces. His captain, Aldrich, had warned him a dozen times. Mercy is a blade that cuts both ways, my lord. But something in the way she looked at him made Valric pause. Not with fear. Not with the hungry cunning of someone seeking advantage. She looked at him like she knew him. Like she'd been waiting. "Can you work?" he asked. She nodded once, slowly. "Can you speak?" She shook her head. Valric studied her for a long moment. The tangled silver-white hair, the too thin frame, the strange pale eyes that seemed to hold centuries behind them. Something stirred in his chest, a flicker of recognition he couldn't name. He ignored it. "Take her to the kitchens," he told the steward. "Find her a bed. We'll see what she's worth." The woman rose, and as she passed him, Valric caught a scent, pine and snow and something wild beneath, that made his wolf stir for the first time in months. He didn't understand why. Not yet. Her name, they discovered, was Neve. She wrote it in the ashes of the kitchen hearth when the cook demanded something to call her. 4 letters traced with a trembling finger, then quickly swept away like she regretted sharing even that much. Neve worked without complaint and without rest. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles cracked. She hauled water from the well in the gray hours before dawn. She peeled vegetables and plucked fowl and did every task the other servants avoided, all in perfect silence. Within a week, the kitchen staff had grown used to her. Within 2, they'd started leaving the worst jobs for the mute girl, knowing she'd never protest. Valric noticed. He noticed more than he should have. From his study window, he watched her cross the courtyard each morning, always taking the same path, always pausing at the same spot near the eastern wall where the old weirwood grew. She'd stand there for exactly 3 breaths. He'd counted. Her pale eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. Then she'd continue on, as if the moment had never happened. "You're staring again." Valric turned to find his sister Marin in the doorway, one eyebrow arched in amusement. "I'm observing. There's a difference." Observing. Marin crossed to the window and peered down at the courtyard. "The silent servant girl. 3rd time this week you've been observing her. She's unusual. She's pretty, in a half-starved sort of way." Marin's tone was teasing, but her eyes were sharp. "Is that what this is? The great lord of Ashvale, finally taking an interest in something other than border patrols and old battle maps? Don't be ridiculous." But even as he said it, Valric's gaze drifted back to the window. Neve had stopped again, but this time not at the weirwood. She stood frozen in the center of the courtyard, her head tilted like a hound catching a distant scent. Then she looked up, directly at his window, directly at him. Their eyes met, and Valric felt it. A jolt that ran from his chest to the base of his spine, electric and ancient and terrifyingly familiar. His wolf surged forward, pressing against his skin, and for one disorienting moment, he could have sworn he smelled blood and pine and winter wind, heard the echo of a howl that had haunted his dreams for 5 years. Then Neve looked away, and the moment shattered. Valric gripped the windowsill, his heart pounding. "Brother?" Marin's voice seemed distant. "You've gone pale. What is it?" He didn't answer. He couldn't explain it. Not to her, not to himself. But for just a second, when their eyes had locked, Valric could have sworn the silent servant girl knew exactly who he was, and exactly what she'd done to save him. The dream started that night. Valric hadn't dreamed of the attack in over a year. He'd thought he was past it. The ambush in the grey mist woods, the clan of rogues who'd wanted his territory and didn't care how much blood they spilled to take it. He'd been 23, arrogant, riding out alone to prove he didn't need an escort. He'd nearly died for that arrogance. 6 wolves had surrounded him, all feral grins and snapping jaws. He'd fought. Gods. He'd fought until his claws were slick with gore and his vision blurred from blood loss. But there were too many, and when the largest rogue had torn open his chest, Valric had known it was over. Then she had come. A wolf unlike any he'd ever seen. White as fresh snow, massive, moving like smoke through the trees. She'd torn through the rogues like they were made of paper, her jaws crushing throats, her claws opening bellies. And when it was done, when Valric lay gasping in a pool of his own blood, she'd done something impossible. She'd shifted, not fully, just enough for human hands to press against his wound, for a voice like wind through winter branches to whisper words he couldn't understand. The pain had been blinding. Then warmth had flooded through him, knitting torn flesh, pulling him back from the edge of death. He'd passed out with her eyes, pale, ancient, infinite, burning into his memory. When he woke, she was gone. Only the scar remained and the stories that spread in the aftermath, the ghost wolf of grey mist. A legend. A myth. But Valric knew she was real. He'd spent years searching, chasing rumors, questioning every pack within 100 miles. He'd never found her. Now, lying sweat-soaked in his bed, the dream still clinging to him like cobwebs, Valric couldn't shake the feeling that she'd found him instead. The next morning, he summoned Neve to his study. She came silently, as she did everything, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes downcast. In the daylight streaming through the window, she looked even more fragile than before. Cheekbones too sharp, wrists too thin, dark shadows bruising the hollows beneath her eyes. But Valric had seen fragile things before. He knew how deceiving appearances could be. "Close the door," he said. She obeyed, then stood waiting, perfectly still. Valric circled his desk slowly, watching her. She didn't fidget, didn't look around, didn't do any of the things nervous servants did when summoned by their lord. She simply waited, patient as stone. "Where do you come from?" he asked. Neve raised her hands, made a gesture he didn't recognize. "You can't speak. I know. But you can write." He pushed a piece of parchment and a quill across the desk. "Write." She hesitated, the first crack in her composure he'd seen. Then she approached, picked up the quill, and wrote in a hand that was surprisingly elegant. "Nowhere that exists anymore." Valric frowned. "What does that mean?" "My home was destroyed. My pack is dead. I have been wandering for a long time." "How long?" Another pause. Then, 5 years. The number hit him like a fist to the chest. 5 years. The same span since the grey mist attack. Since the ghost wolf had vanished. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. But his wolf was pacing now, agitated, pressing against his ribs with an urgency that bordered on painful. "Look at me," Valric commanded. Neve raised her head. Their eyes met, and there it was again. That jolt, that impossible recognition, the scent of pine and snow and wild magic. Before we continue, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more listeners find these stories. "The scar on my chest," Valric said slowly, his voice rougher than he intended. "I got it 5 years ago, in the grey mist woods. Something saved me that night. Someone." Neve's expression didn't change, but her hand, still holding the quill, trembled almost imperceptibly. "There are stories," he continued, stepping closer, "about a wolf, white as snow, appears from nowhere, vanishes without a trace. They call her the ghost wolf." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to see her pulse fluttering in her throat. "Do you know anything about that?" Neve didn't move. The tension in the room thickened until it felt hard to breathe. Then she wrote, her strokes slower now, more deliberate. "I know many stories. Wolves tell tales to survive the long winters. That's not an answer. It is the only one I can give." Valric studied her, frustration and fascination warring in his chest. She was hiding something. That much was obvious, but pressing harder would only make her retreat further into her silence. He made a decision. "I'm moving you out of the kitchens," he said. "From now on, you serve in the main house. You'll attend to my private study, my library, and my chambers." Neve's eyes widened, the first genuine reaction he'd drawn from her. "You'll have better quarters, better food, and access to areas most servants never see." He held her gaze. "In exchange, you'll answer my questions. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, Neve, you'll tell me who you really are." She should have looked afraid. Anyone with sense would have, faced with a lord's suspicion. Instead, something flickered across her face. Something that looked almost like relief. She bowed her head and placed her hand over her heart. A gesture of acceptance that felt older than the keep itself. Valric watched her go, his wolf still restless beneath his skin. He'd spent 5 years chasing a ghost. Now the ghost was sleeping under his roof, and he had the strangest feeling that everything he thought he knew was about to unravel. The new quarters were larger than any space Neve had occupied in 5 years, a narrow bed with actual linens, a window overlooking the mountains, a small hearth where coals glowed amber through the night. After so long sleeping in hollows and caves and the frozen gaps between tree roots, it felt almost obscene. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, and tried to quiet the storm inside her chest. He suspected, not everything, not yet, but enough. She'd seen it in his eyes when he spoke of gray mist, the way his gaze had sharpened, searching her face for cracks in her composure. She should run. Every instinct she'd honed over 5 years of survival screamed at her to slip out the window, shift under the cover of darkness, and disappear before he could piece together the truth. But she couldn't. She'd tried to stay away. Tried to convince herself that saving his life had been enough, that the debt between them was settled, that she could vanish into the wild places and forget the young lord whose blood had stained her muzzle. It hadn't worked. The bond had called her back. That inexplicable thread she'd felt snap into place the moment her magic had touched his dying flesh. It had pulled at her across mountains and rivers, through blizzards and hunger, until she'd found herself at his gates, with no plan and no words, and nothing to offer but her silence. Now she was here, and he was asking questions, and sooner or later he would learn what she was. The ghost wolf. The last of the Wintervane pack. A creature the hunters had been seeking for half a decade. If Valric discovered the truth, he could turn her over and claim the bounty. He could cage her, use her, and break her the way so many others had tried. Or he could do what no one had done in 5 years. He could let her stay. The first week passed in quiet tension. Neve cleaned his study each morning, organizing books and maps with careful precision. She learned his habits, the way he took his tea bitter, the way he rubbed his temples when the reports grew too grim, the way he paused at the window each afternoon to watch the training yard below. She learned other things, too. That he slept poorly, often pacing his chambers past midnight. That he carried guilt like a physical weight, visible in the set of his shoulders. That despite his reputation for coldness, he remembered every servant's name and asked after the stable boy's sick mother. He was not what the stories claimed, and that made everything harder. On the 8th night, it happened. Neve was lighting the candles in his study when Valric entered unexpectedly, still damp from the training yard, a shallow cut bleeding sluggishly across his forearm. "It's nothing," he said when he caught her staring. "Aldrich got lucky with a practice blade." But Neve was already moving, some instinct overriding her caution. She crossed to him, took his arm in her hands, and examined the wound before she could stop herself. The moment her fingers touched his skin, the world tilted. Heat flooded through her. Not painful, but profound, like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. The bond, that thread she'd tried so hard to ignore, blazed to life between them, and she felt him. His surprise, his confusion, and beneath it, something older. Recognition. Valric sucked in a sharp breath. "What?" His voice was hoarse. "What was that?" Neve dropped his arm and stepped back, her heart racing against her ribs. She couldn't explain, couldn't write fast enough to lie convincingly, so she simply stood there, trembling, as Valric stared at her with an expression that was equal parts wonder and suspicion. "You felt that too," he said slowly. "Whatever that was. You felt it." She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, but her silence was answer enough. After that night, everything shifted. Valric didn't mention what had happened, not directly, but his gaze followed her now with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He found reasons to be in his study when she was cleaning, asked her to bring his evening tea personally, invented tasks that required her presence, her nearness. He was testing the connection, trying to understand it. Neve understood. She'd spent 5 years trying to do the same. The bond between a wolf and the one they'd saved wasn't supposed to work like this. The old stories spoke of gratitude, of protection, of a thread that faded once the debt was repaid. They didn't speak of this. The constant pull toward him, the way her wolf settled when he was near, the growing certainty that she'd found something she hadn't known she was searching for. She tried to keep her distance, tried to be nothing more than the silent servant he'd hired. It didn't work. 3 weeks after her arrival, Valric summoned her to the library. It was late, well past the hour when proper servants were asleep. But Neve had been awake anyway, sitting by her window, watching the moon trace its path across the winter sky. She found him standing before the massive fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, shadows carving his features into something haunted. "I need to show you something," he said, without preamble, "and I need you to tell me if I've lost my mind." He crossed to a table where a large map lay spread, weighted at the corners with stones. Neve approached cautiously, her eyes tracing the familiar geography: Ashvale to the west, the gray mist woods to the north, the mountain territories scattered like broken teeth along the eastern border. But it wasn't the geography that made her breath catch. It was the markings. Dozens of them. Small red symbols scattered across the map, concentrated most heavily around Thornwood Keep and the surrounding territories. "Disappearances," Valric said quietly. "Wolves from allied packs, travelers, merchants, even a few of my own border patrols." He took a long drink. 17 in the past 4 months. At first I thought rogues, the same kind who attacked me in Grey Mist. But the pattern is wrong. Rogues are chaotic. This is systematic. Neve studied the map, dread pooling in her stomach. "Someone is hunting us," Valric continued, "specifically targeting wolves with gifts, healers, seers, trackers." His jaw tightened. "And 3 weeks ago, right before you appeared at my gates, a messenger arrived from the Southern Conclave. They've heard rumors of a buyer, someone paying handsomely for gifted wolves, alive." He turned to face her, and the weight of his gaze pressed against her like a physical thing. You wandered alone for 5 years. You survived when your entire pack was destroyed. You have a gift. I can feel it every time I'm near you, even if I don't understand what it is. He stepped closer, and Neve fought the urge to retreat. So tell me, Neve, are you running from whoever is doing this? Or are you something else entirely? She couldn't answer, not without revealing everything. But as she stood frozen in the firelight, her wolf stirred with sudden urgency. Something was wrong, not with Valric, with the keep itself. She could feel it now, that prickle at the edge of her senses that had kept her alive through 5 years of running. Danger. Close. Hidden in plain sight. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to Valric, and she made a decision. She grabbed the quill from his desk and wrote rapidly, her hand shaking. Someone in your keep is not what they seem. I can feel it. A wrongness. Please, be careful who you trust. Valric read the words, his expression darkening. Who? Give me a name. But Neve couldn't. She didn't know yet. Only that the threat existed, coiled like a viper in the heart of his home. She shook her head helplessly. Valric crumpled the parchment in his fist, frustration evident in every line of his body. Then find out. Use whatever gift you're hiding. Because if someone in my keep is connected to these disappearances... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Neve bowed her head in acceptance, her heart heavy with the weight of what she'd just promised. She would hunt the traitor, protect him from the shadows as she'd once protected him from death. Even if it meant revealing exactly what she was, Neve began watching. Not the obvious way. She was too skilled for that. 5 years of survival had taught her to observe from the periphery, to catch the details others missed, to read intention in the smallest gestures. She watched the servants as they moved through their duties, noting who lingered too long near locked doors, who asked too many questions, who received letters they quickly hid. She watched the guards, memorizing patrol patterns, identifying the ones whose loyalty seemed performative rather than genuine. And she watched Aldrich. Valric's captain was everything a trusted second should be: efficient, competent, devoted. He'd served the Ashvale pack for 15 years, first under Valric's father, now under Valric himself. The other wolves respected him. Valric relied on him. But something about him made Neve's hackles rise. It wasn't obvious. He said all the right things, made all the right moves. But twice now she'd caught him watching Valric with an expression that flickered too quickly to read. Something cold beneath the warmth, calculating beneath the loyalty. And there was the matter of the letters. Aldrich received correspondence every few days, which wasn't unusual for a captain managing border relations. But Neve had noticed that he never opened these particular letters in the Great Hall with the others. He took them to his quarters, and they were always burned within the hour. She needed to see one of those letters. The opportunity came 5 nights later. A celebration in the Great Hall, some minor victory at the eastern border, had drawn most of the keep's inhabitants to drink and feast. Aldrich was there, performing his role as loyal captain, raising toasts to Valric's health. Neve slipped away unnoticed. His quarters were locked, but locks meant little to a wolf who had learned to move through spaces most considered impassable. She shifted just enough, fingers elongating into claws, senses sharpening to catch the faintest sound, and picked the mechanism in seconds. Inside, the room was militantly organized, weapons mounted on walls, maps spread across a desk, a narrow bed made with precise corners, and in the hearth, the remnants of burned parchment. Neve knelt, her heart hammering. Most of the letters had been reduced to ash, but one corner remained intact, the flames having missed their mark. She lifted it carefully, tilting it toward the moonlight streaming through the window. The words were fragmented, incomplete. Shipment ready for transfer. The healer must not be discovered. Ashvale wolves fetch higher prices. Await your signal to move on the keep. Neve's blood turned to ice. Aldrich wasn't just suspicious. He was the traitor. He was selling wolves, his own packmates, to whoever was collecting the gifted. And he was planning something. Something imminent. Something that would strike at the heart of Thornwood Keep. She had to warn Valric. But as she turned toward the door, a shadow filled the frame. Aldrich stood there, his expression unreadable, a knife already in his hand. I wondered when you'd show your true colors, little servant. His smile was cold, empty of the warmth he showed in public. I've been watching you too, you know. The way the Lord looks at you. The way you move like something pretending to be human. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I don't know what you are yet, but I know what you're worth. His eyes glittered with cruel calculation. The buyers pay triple for wolves with unusual gifts. And something tells me you're very unusual indeed. Neve's claws extended, her wolf surging to the surface, but Aldrich just laughed. Go ahead. Shift. Fight. Scream. Oh wait, you can't. He advanced slowly, savoring her fear. By the time anyone notices you're missing, you'll be halfway to the southern markets. And Valric will have one more disappearance to add to his little map. Neve backed against the wall, her mind racing. She could fight. Probably win. Aldrich was strong, but she was the ghost wolf, the creature who had torn through 6 rogues without a scratch. But if she revealed herself now, everything would unravel. The bounty hunters would come. The keep would learn what she was. And Valric. Valric would know she'd been lying since the moment she knelt in his courtyard. She had seconds to decide. Fight and expose herself, or find another way. Neve chose a third option. She didn't shift, didn't fight. Instead, she let her body go limp, her eyes rolling back, and crumpled to the floor like a puppet with severed strings. Aldrich hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. She heard him step closer, felt him crouch to check if she was breathing. The moment his guard dropped, she moved. Her elbow connected with his throat. Her knee drove into his stomach. And before he could recover, she was past him, through the door, and running. Not toward her quarters, not toward safety, toward Valric. She found him in the great hall, still surrounded by celebrating wolves, a cup raised in his hand. The moment she burst through the doors, wild-eyed and gasping, the room fell silent. Neve? Valric set down his cup, concern replacing confusion. What happened? She couldn't speak, could only grab his arm and pull, desperate to get him away from the crowd, away from Aldrich's allies, away from anyone who might be part of the conspiracy. Valric followed without question, calling over his shoulder for the guards to stay put. She led him to his study, slammed the door and pressed her back against it, her chest heaving. Neve. Valric's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. Tell me what happened. Write it if you have to. Her hands shook as she grabbed the quill. Aldrich is the traitor. He is selling wolves to buyers in the south. I found proof. He caught me. He plans to move on the keep soon. Valric read the words once, twice. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shattered. Aldrich, he said quietly. My father's captain. My captain. 15 years. Neve nodded, her heart aching at the betrayal carved into his features. You're certain? I saw the letters. He admitted it when he found me. He wanted to take me too. He didn't move, didn't speak. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then he crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. I trusted him. His voice was raw. After my parents died, he was the one who helped me hold everything together. I would have given my life for him. Neve approached slowly, stopping just behind him. She wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. didn't know if she had the right. Then Valric turned, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. Not anger, not grief. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like fear. He wanted to take you, Valric said. Specifically you. Why? Neve's throat tightened. There's something you're not telling me. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Something you've been hiding since the moment you arrived. I've felt it. This connection between us. It's not normal, Neve. It's not just attraction or curiosity. It's like my wolf knows you, like we've met before. She couldn't move, couldn't look away. The ghost wolf, Valric continued softly. The one who saved me in Grey Mist. I've been searching for her for 5 years, chasing rumors and shadows. His hand rose, hesitating just before touching her cheek. And then you appear at my gates, silent and starving, and suddenly my wolf is at peace for the first time since that night. Tears burned in Neve's eyes. Is it you? His voice cracked on the question. Are you the one who saved me? She should deny it, should shake her head and retreat into her silence, protect herself the way she'd always done, but she was so tired of hiding. Slowly, trembling, she raised her hand and placed it over the scar on his chest, the one she'd sealed with her own magic 5 years ago. Valric's breath caught. Neve. She met his eyes, letting him see the truth she couldn't speak. Yes, it was me. It has always been me. Something broke open in his expression, wonder and disbelief, and a joy so fierce it made her heart stutter. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative. It was 5 years of searching, 5 years of longing, 5 years of dreams about pale eyes and pine-scented fur, all poured into a single desperate press of lips. Neve melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her wolf singing with a completeness she'd never known. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valric pressed his forehead to hers. I found you, he whispered. Gods, I finally found you. You didn't find me, she wanted to say. I found you. I couldn't stay away. But words weren't necessary. The bond hummed between them, bright and undeniable, saying everything she couldn't. Then a horn sounded in the distance, 3 sharp blasts, the signal for an attack on the keep. Valric's expression hardened. Aldrich, he's making his move. Neve grabbed his arm, her eyes fierce. Let me fight with you. He hesitated, and she saw the war in his face, the need to protect her battling with the recognition of what she was. You're the ghost wolf, he said finally. The wolf who tore through 6 rogues without a scratch. She nodded. A grim smile touched his lips. Then fight beside me. But Neve. His hand cupped her cheek. If anything happens to you, I will burn this entire territory to the ground. Understand? She understood. Together they ran toward the sound of battle. The courtyard was chaos. Wolves in their beast forms clashed with armored strangers, humans and wolves alike, fighting in a coordinated assault that spoke of careful planning. Neve counted at least 30 attackers pouring through a breach in the eastern wall, the same wall where she'd paused every morning, the same spot where she'd sensed something wrong but hadn't understood what. Aldrich had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Marin! Valric shouted, spotting his sister across the yard, her sword already bloody. Get the children to the underground passages. Go! Marin nodded and disappeared into the chaos, a group of young wolves following close behind. Valric shifted mid-stride, his body rippling into a massive gray wolf that moved like thunder across the courtyard. He hit the nearest attacker at full speed, jaws closing around the man's throat before he could raise his weapon. Neve hesitated only a moment. Then she shifted too. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined. Bones reshaping, senses exploding, her human limitations falling away like shed skin. When it was complete, she stood in her true form for the first time in years, white as fresh snow, larger than any natural wolf, eyes like winter moons. The ghost wolf had returned. For one frozen instant the battle paused. Wolves on both sides stared at her, recognition and terror flickering across their faces. Then Neve moved. She was faster than memory, deadlier than rumor. The attackers who tried to stop her fell like wheat before a scythe. She fought her way toward Valric, watching his back, covering his blind spots, moving with him in a synchronicity that felt ancient and instinctive. They were magnificent together. Two halves of something whole, but Aldrich wasn't among the attackers. Neve's heart clenched with sudden dread. If he wasn't here, fighting with his hired soldiers, then where? Valric! Marin's scream cut through the chaos. Neve spun to see Aldrich emerging from the keep's main entrance, a blade pressed to Marin's throat. He'd circled around while everyone was distracted, found the children, intercepted them before they reached safety. Enough! Aldrich's voice rang across the courtyard. The fighting stuttered to a halt. Valric shifted back to human form, his chest heaving and blood streaking his skin. Let her go, Aldrich. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with your entire bloodline. Aldrich's mask of loyalty had fully crumbled, revealing the bitter hatred beneath. Your father passed me over for promotion. Your mother treated me like a servant. And you. His lip curled. You've spent 3 years playing at leadership while I did the real work of keeping this pack alive. So you sold our wolves to slavers? Valric's voice was ice. Murdered innocents for gold? I sold the weak to fund an army strong enough to take what I deserve. Aldrich pressed the blade harder against Marin's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your wolves to stand down. You're going to surrender yourself to my buyers. The Alpha of Ashvale will fetch a fortune. And then, I'm going to take your throne. And if I refuse? Then your sister dies. Then the children hiding in the passage behind me die. And then I kill everyone in this courtyard anyway. Aldrich smiled. Your choice, my lord. Neve watched Valric's face, saw the impossible calculation happening behind his eyes. He would surrender. She knew it. He would trade his life for Marin's without hesitation. She couldn't let that happen. Slowly, silently, she began to move. Not toward Aldrich. He would see that coming. Instead, she circled wide, using the shadows, the chaos of frozen bodies, the smoke drifting from a burning outbuilding. She was the ghost wolf. She'd learned to hunt in impossible conditions, and Aldrich had made a fatal mistake. He'd forgotten about her entirely. Neve struck from the shadows like vengeance given form. One moment Aldrich stood triumphant, blade at Marin's throat. The next, a white blur slammed into him from behind, jaws closing around his sword arm with a sickening crunch. Aldrich screamed. The blade clattered to the stones. Marin wrenched free and ran. Neve didn't let go. She dragged Aldrich across the courtyard, her teeth grinding against bone, her wolf howling with righteous fury. This man had betrayed his pack, had sold innocent wolves to suffering and death, had threatened the one person in the world who mattered. She wanted to kill him. Every instinct demanded it. But Valric's voice cut through the bloodlust. Neve, stop. She froze, Aldrich whimpering beneath her paws. Valric approached slowly, his expression unreadable. He needs to face justice, a trial. Let the pack see what he's done. Neve's wolf snarled in protest, but she understood. A public execution would mean nothing, just another death in a night full of them. A trial would expose the conspiracy, identify Aldrich's allies, and send a message to the buyers in the south. It was the smarter choice, the leader's choice. Reluctantly, she released Aldrich and stepped back. He lay gasping on the stones, his arm a ruined mess, his face twisted with pain and hatred. You think this is over? He spat, The buyers have resources you can't imagine. They'll send more. They'll. Valric knelt beside him, his voice soft and deadly. Let them come. They'll find a pack that knows its enemies now, a pack that has the ghost wolf fighting beside it. He glanced at Neve, and something warm flickered in his eyes. I think we'll manage. Aldrich laughed, blood bubbling on his lips. The ghost wolf. You think she'll stay? She's a wanderer, a survivor. The moment things get difficult, she'll disappear like smoke. Valric didn't respond, but Neve did. She shifted, a process she'd always done in private, always hidden from watching eyes. But now she let them see. Let the entire courtyard watch as her white fur receded, as her bones reshaped, as she rose on human legs and stood naked and unashamed in the moonlight. Someone brought her a cloak. She wrapped it around herself without breaking eye contact with Aldrich. Then she spoke. Her voice was rusty, cracked from 5 years of silence, but the words came clear. I'm not going anywhere. The courtyard fell utterly still. Valric stared at her, his expression shattered open with wonder. You can speak? I chose not to. Her throat ached, but she forced the words out. Speaking meant revealing myself, connecting, risking. She swallowed hard. I was afraid. And now? She looked at him. This man who had searched for her for 5 years, who had offered her shelter without knowing what she was, who had kissed her like she was something precious rather than something dangerous. Now I'm more afraid of leaving. Valric crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Around them, the pack erupted in chaos. Questions, exclamations, the sounds of attackers being subdued and prisoners being secured. But Neve heard none of it. She only heard Valric's heartbeat against her ear, steady and strong. She only felt his arms around her, holding her like he'd never let go. And for the first time in 5 years, Neve let herself believe she was home. The trial lasted 3 days. Aldrich's conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had suspected. A network of informants, smugglers, and corrupted pack members spanning half the northern territories. By the time the evidence had been presented and the testimonies heard, 17 wolves had been arrested alongside the former captain. Aldrich himself showed no remorse. He stood before the council with his ruined arm bound, his eyes burning with hatred, and declared that he would do it all again. The sentence was unanimous. Death at dawn. Neve didn't attend the execution. She'd seen enough death to last several lifetimes. Instead, she waited in Valric's study, watching the sun rise over the mountains, trying to quiet the uncertainty still churning in her chest. The door opened behind her. It's done, Valric said quietly. She nodded without turning. He crossed the room and stood beside her at the window. Neither spoke. The silence held weight. Then Valric said, The pack is calling you a hero. The ghost wolf who saved Thornwood Keep. Marin's been telling anyone who'll listen that you're the bravest wolf she's ever met. I'm not brave. Neve's voice was still rough, still unfamiliar in her own ears. I spent 5 years running, hiding, pretending to be something small and harmless. You survived? That takes its own kind of courage. She shook her head. I came here because I couldn't stay away. The bond. It pulled me across territories, through winters, past every instinct telling me to remain hidden. I told myself I was just checking on you, making sure you were safe. But the truth is, she faltered. The truth is, I needed you. The admission felt like tearing open a wound. I saved your life in Greymist, and somehow, in doing so, I bound myself to you. I've felt you for 5 years, Valric. Your grief when your parents died, your exhaustion, your loneliness. I felt it all, and I couldn't. Her voice broke. I couldn't leave you alone with it. Valric was silent for so long that Neve feared she'd said too much. Then his hand found hers, warm and steady. Stay, he said simply. You don't know what you're asking. The hunters are still out there. The buyers Aldrich mentioned. They'll come eventually. Having me here puts your entire pack at risk. Let them come. Valric turned her to face him, his gray eyes fierce. I spent 5 years searching for a ghost. Now she's standing in front of me, telling me she's felt my heart for half a decade, and you think I'm going to let her walk away because it's dangerous? Valric, I'm not asking you to stay because you're powerful or useful or because the pack needs a hero. His hands cupped her face. I'm asking you to stay because I love you, because my wolf recognized you the moment you knelt in my courtyard. Because every day you're here, I feel more whole than I've felt since my parents died. Tears streaked down Neve's cheeks. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I've been alone so long. I don't know how to belong somewhere. Then learn. He pressed his forehead to hers. Learn with me. Stay and let me show you what it means to have a home. She should have argued, should have listed all the reasons it was too dangerous, too complicated, and too fragile. Instead, she said, yes. The bonding ceremony was held under the winter moon. Neve wore a gown the color of fresh snow, her silver-white hair unbound and flowing past her shoulders. The pack had gathered on the mountain overlook, the same spot where the weirwood grew, where she'd paused every morning without understanding why. Now she understood. This place hummed with ancient magic, with bonds formed and sealed across generations. It had been calling her home. Valric stood waiting at the ceremonial stone, dressed in the deep gray of Ashvale, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. Maren stood beside him as witness, her smile wide enough to split her face. The elder who performed the ceremony spoke of duty and partnership, of wolves who found each other across impossible distances. But Neve barely heard the words. She was looking at Valric, at the man who had searched for her for 5 years, who had taken in a silent servant and treated her with kindness, who had kissed her like she was precious and fought beside her like she was his equal. When the time came for vows, Valric took her hands in his. I choose you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not the ghost wolf, not the legend. You, Neve, the woman who survived unimaginable loss and still had room in her heart for hope. The woman who saved my life and then spent 5 years making sure I was worthy of it. Neve's throat tightened. I spent years running, she said, her voice stronger now, steadier. Convinced I was meant to be alone. But you found me anyway. Not by chasing, by waiting, by being someone worth coming home to. She squeezed his hands. I choose you, Valric, today and every day after. My wolf, my home, my heart. The bond flared between them, not a chain, but a bridge, as their wrists were bound with ceremonial ribbon and their wolves sang in harmony. When Valric kissed her, the pack erupted in howls of celebration. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, trading stories and secrets, learning the shape of a future neither had dared imagine. Tell me something, Valric murmured against her hair. Something I don't know. Neve thought for a moment. When I first arrived, I didn't plan to stay. I told myself I'd make sure you were safe, then disappear again. What changed? You asked if I could work. She smiled against his chest. You didn't ask what I was worth. You asked what I could do. No one had ever... She paused. No one had ever just let me be useful without demanding to know what I was hiding first. Valric's arms tightened around her. I knew you were hiding something. But you let me hide it until I was ready. That's what trust is. He tilted her chin up, his eyes soft. Your turn. Ask me something. Neve considered. When did you know? That I was the ghost wolf? No. He shook his head. I didn't know until you showed me. But I felt it. That first moment in the courtyard. My wolf went completely still, like he'd been waiting his whole life for that exact moment. He kissed her forehead. I think part of me recognized you before my mind caught up. The bond. The bond. He smiled. Best thing that ever happened to me. Neve pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, feeling the warmth of the connection that had pulled her across territories and years and fears. She'd poured her magic into his dying body on a frozen forest floor, never expecting anything in return. But he'd given her everything anyway. Months later, Neve stood at her favorite spot by the weirwood, watching the sun set over the mountains. So much had changed. Aldrich's network had been dismantled. The southern buyers had gone quiet, deterred by the stories spreading through the territories. Stories of the ghost wolf who protected Ashvale, who fought beside its alpha, who had turned a fractured pack into something unbreakable. Valric's arms wrapped around her from behind, thinking deep thoughts. Thinking about the night I arrived. She leaned back into his warmth. I was starving, terrified, convinced I'd made a mistake. And now? Neve smiled. Now I know I was exactly where I was supposed to be. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Best servant I ever hired. She laughed, the sound bright and free, so different from the silence she'd carried for 5 years. He'd taken in a ghost, and she'd found her voice. She'd saved his life, and he'd given her a reason to live it. Fair trade, she thought. Fair trade indeed. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below. I love hearing from you. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people discover these tales.